Good evening, everyone. Councilwoman Amanda Sandoval here. Thank you for joining us this evening and taking time out of the evening to join us for this virtual town hall. I wanted to welcome everyone. I'm going to do the best to pay attention and also manage the Zoom. We have tonight, we will go over the proposal I'm asking your opinions on to rezone the whole entire neighborhood, Sloan's Lake neighborhood, to allow accessory dwelling units. Based on the analysis my office has done, Sloan's Lake has done the most one-off accessory dwelling units than any other neighborhood in Northwest Denver. So we wanted to take this opportunity to see if this neighborhood would like to have it rezoned to allow accessory dwelling units instead of them having to be done one-off and have one person just do it at a time. I'm currently working on this proposal in Chaffee Park, and it's going pretty smoothly. We've gotten some good feedback, so I figured we would do the analysis to see where this is happening most frequently in Northwest Denver, and this is why we are all meeting with you all this evening. So with that, we have a really good presentation that my staff, Naomi Grendens, will be giving. And I have muted everyone, but if you would like to talk, in the right-hand corner, there's a 3 button, and you can raise your hand when we get to the agenda, number 4, the Q&A, or you can put some comments in the chat. Also, I am streaming this live on Facebook so that we have this documented, and we are recording it. So we will send it out and keep it on the website that we created, the bit.ly at Sloan's Lake ADU. So with that, Naomi, feel free to take over.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I am Naomi. I'm going to be giving a presentation on what exactly ADUs are. And after that, we're going to talk briefly about next steps. And then most of the time is set aside for Q&A. We've got some great people from the planning department available to answer questions. They can answer super technical questions, and I'm sure you'll have a lot of them. So please do hold questions until the end. As the councilman mentioned, you can always put them in the chat. You can raise your hand virtually when we get to the Q&A portion. And also, I do know that we have some people who are joining us on the phone. So if you are solely listening in on the phone, if you want to do the equivalent of raising your hand, you can press *9. And then when it's your turn to talk, you can press *6, and that will toggle between mute and unmute the way that the Zoom webinar is set up. So I will repeat this again when we get to the Q&A section to make sure that the people that are on the phone can also chime in. All right, so let's get going. So I'm gonna try and keep this to about 15 minutes. I'm gonna go through what ADUs are and exactly how they work in Denver, because Denver has very specific rules about them that it may be different from other cities. We'll talk a little bit about some of the benefits of ADUs and why people may want to build one. We'll talk then about zoning, rezoning ADUs, specifically in Sloan's Lake, and sort of what that process looks like. And then at the end, we'll show you the outreach plan that we've done so far, and we'll talk a little bit about the next steps over the next few months. So what are ADUs? They have a lot of names. Granny flats, casitas, carriage houses, cottages. Generally, a small unit we think of in the back of a property, something very modest. ADUs have a very specific definition, though, in the zoning code. So they define an ADU as an extra dwelling unit located inside or behind the primary house. And that difference of inside or behind is important because oftentimes when we think of an ADU, we think of, again, like a separate like casita or studio in the back, but there are actually two kinds. There's detached ADUs, which is that, and then there's attached ADUs. So I'll go and show you what those are. So here's a detached ADU, pretty much what you think of when you think of a detached ADU. But you can also have an attached ADU, and this may look very much like a simple addition. A lot of people add on to their houses in the back, and this could look a lot like that. The only difference being it's its own unit. It has its own entrance, it has a kitchen, etc. And then lastly, this picture isn't exactly very clear, but here you can see this is actually a basement unit. There are a lot of wonderful walkout basements and space that people can turn into living space. Again, the thing that makes it an ADU is that it has its own entrance, it has a kitchen, it has everything and more that's required to be considered a separate dwelling unit. So as an example, this is a real house in Denver that has a basement ADU, and often with these, you can't even tell from the front that it's down there. So how are ADUs regulated in the zoning code? There are a lot of rules. The code regulates, first of all, the overall height and size, how far it has to be set back from property lines, which is this image in the middle. So you can't build it right up against the fence of your neighbor. It even has rules about occupancy. So the number of people that can occupy an ADU is limited for the square footage. And for the overall size and how big an ADU can be, that often is related to how big your lot is. So if you have a larger lot, you could have a larger ADU, but they generally max out at a certain cap of livable space. And they also have a maximum of the footprint that they can be. Because what all this does is that it really enforces the idea that this is a unit that is smaller, it's subordinate, it's accessory to the main house. It should not look bigger, it should not be overwhelming. There's even rules that it has to look compatible with the main house. And then there's also some rules about what you can do with the property after it's built. So the land underneath the detached ADU cannot be subdivided and sold off separately. So once you build an ADU, you have to be the owner of that property. You build that ADU, you can't all of a sudden turn it into a whole other property back there. It has to remain an accessory use associated with the main house in the front. And again, the owner of the property has to live on the property. They can live in the ADU, you can live in the main house, but you do have to live on the property. And that's all intended to prevent any sort of use of this as a commercialization or way of getting around ending up building kind of a real two-unit duplex situation. So to reinforce, ADUs are not duplexes, they are not apartments, and they are not commercial. Excuse me, there we go. So some of the benefits of ADUs, why would people want to build them? So one reason is for financial stability. So income from ADUs, you can rent them out for a long-term tenant or for a short-term. And this can really help people who are on a fixed income or just generally struggling with the rising costs of living that we have here in Denver. And on the flip side, ADUs themselves are smaller units. They tend to be more naturally affordable just by the fact that they're smaller. So it does help to create a bit more affordable housing in the city. And then another really big reason many people think about ADUs is actually for housing family members. They're a technique for the term aging in place, which really means as we get older and maybe our needs change, we require extra care, or a large house isn't as feasible to take care of or even navigate around, rather than having to go to assisted living or any other kind of care facility. An ADU is a place that you can move into that's maybe built on one level or is more accessible, but you can stay on your property. Or conversely, you could have build an ADU in the back for a family member to move into. And this can help save a lot on the costs of living and keep families together, which is so important. Another aspect of ADUs is just the simple fact that they're built in the back of properties. It creates this thing we call eyes on the street or eyes on the alley. And it's the simple effect of that someone is living there, someone cares, someone is looking out their windows. It can actually help increase the safety in alleys because there's just someone there keeping an eye on it. And then lastly, just overall neighborhood vitality, it can be a tool to help displacement, and it can be a really great way to add housing without demolishing existing houses, because the whole idea is that you don't do anything with the house in the front, the thing that you see from the street. It's just a unit that's added in the back. So ADUs, since the zoning code was established in 2010, there are a bunch of zones, areas throughout Denver that already allow ADUs. They're by default allowed anywhere that has 2-unit or multi-unit zoning, which there is some in Sloan's Lake, I'll show you in a second. And then there are also many places where it's single unit zoning, but where ADUs already existed, or for some other reason, the 2010 zoning code designated that already as a place where ADUs are allowed. And altogether, this takes about 25% of the city already zoned to allow ADUs. Specifically in Sloan's Lake, this map, anything in color on this map basically allows ADUs already. So you can see there's actually a really large chunk from roughly Lowell, or kind of maybe the alley west of Lowell, and then to the east, that's 2-unit zoning. And so there are a lot of single family homes there, but because it's 2-unit zoning, ADUs are already allowed in that entire portion. There's also some smaller little individual squares that I will talk about in a second. So for the rest of the properties that don't currently have zoning for ADUs, there's a really simple way to get that in the single unit zone district. And it really means rezoning to a zone district that is exactly the same in every way as the existing zoning. It just allows the ADU to be built. And the way that that looks is that there's a 1 added to the end. Let's see. This does not change single family zoning, importantly. So as this example here, USUB, that's a single family or single unit zone district. We're not rezoning to something other that allows multi-units. It really just allows ADUs. That is the only change that happens. So in Sloan's Lake, as we showed, there's that giant yellow kind of blotch over there where ADUs are allowed, but there's actually all these little tiny portions you almost can't see. And just to remind everyone, you as a property owner have the right to request a rezoning to allow an ADU if you currently don't live in an area that allows them. And that is what's been happening in Sloan's Lake, and is actually what is prompting this whole project. So in red here, you can see, this is, I pulled this map a couple of months ago now, and we've actually gotten more since then. So you can see all these individual property owners have gone through this long process with the city and paid a fee and gotten their zoning to build an ADU. And there's even like a larger chunk down here, kind of on Mead, that has done that as well. So downsides of having to do it by yourself is that it costs $1,000 and it takes 4 to 6 months, even longer, to do it. It's a long process. So the alternative that is being proposed now is simply based on the demand that we've been seeing from all these one-off rezonings coming in Sloan's Lake, and proposing to the community that the councilmen basically carry a rezoning for everybody so that these one-offs don't have to happen. It'll save people time and money and process. So this map you probably have seen if you went to the landing page and registered for all of this. The purple or magenta and turquoise colors are the areas that we are looking at including in this rezoning. And we have gotten a bunch of questions about why are some areas not eligible? Why do we have these areas that aren't going to be rezoned? And I will say that part of that is due to the previous map, that ADUs are already allowed in a big portion of this. kind of this area here. Another reason that a property may not have been included in this is a little more tricky and complicated, and it has to do with the fact that there are some parts of the city, like this block up here between Perry and Osceola, that are actually not in current zoning. They have old zoning. It just adds a lot of complexity. So there may be a different path forward for those properties to get ADUs, but with this larger proposal now, we're not looking at those. So we have sent out a survey, which I hope you all have filled out. If you have not, please do. A couple of slides later, I will have the link to it posted up. So please share it far and wide. We want to make sure as many people who would be affected by this chime in as possible. As of yesterday, I believe we have had 158 responses, which is fantastic. We still have ways to go though, because I think there are about 1,700 doors that this would affect. So we would love to hear from more people. This is a map that I made of roughly the distribution of yeses, nos, and undecideds, and how people responded. And so what's great is that we have gotten a nice kind of distribution. You know, it's not just people from one block responding. But again, would love, please share this link later with your friends and neighbors and make sure everybody responds. And now I'm going to show you a little bit of what we've heard so far, and hopefully this will spark some conversation. So out of the 158 that have answered, this is how it breaks down for support. We've got roughly almost 70% in support. We've got 22% opposed, and then a nice 8.23 that have been undecided and need a little bit more information. And hopefully some of you are here today to learn and ask questions. We also, as you may have noticed, asked a couple more questions, such as, if the rezoning goes through, would you build an ADU? Because one thing, a concern we've heard, and also something good to know is, you know, would this rezoning all of a sudden result in 1 billion ADUs on every single property in Sloan's Lake? And we can see from people's intent that that would not be the case. Honestly, 35%, so a third of the people who took this survey, don't really ever intend to build an ADU. They just support them. And only 18%, that is 28 people, but out of 1,700, do plan to build an ADU immediately. And the rest think about it in maybe 3 to 7 years, something they would like to do, but it's not going to happen immediately. We also really wanted to know why people were interested in building an ADU. So this slide I think is really interesting to share. The primary reason that a third of people answered was as a guest house. And I believe the question was specifically a guest house for visiting friends and family. So there wouldn't be someone living there all the time. It would probably be used as a studio or something for the property owner, and then as a place for friends and family to live. The second most common response was that they didn't plan to build an ADU. But when we get down below that, a huge chunk of people want to build an ADU so they can house a family member, which goes back to one of those really big benefits that ADUs can have for a neighborhood. And then we got studio or office. Below that, renting it out for a long-term tenant. That means year-long lease, just regular tenant. Below that was other, and I noted that other people wrote in as a gym, or interestingly, as a home for a live-in caretaker or nanny for either their kids or themselves. And then down at the very bottom, only 4% of people said that they would actually want to use this for a short-term rental, which is interesting to hear because we definitely hear a lot of concerns about people building ADUs and then renting them out. But this is what your neighbors plan to do if they build an ADU. So I wanted to share some of the reasons that also your neighbors have said that they want to build an ADU. And then on the next slide, we'll talk about some of the concerns that we've heard, because that is definitely part of our role today in Q&A, is to address those and talk a little bit more about the concerns. So I picked out what I thought was representative of kind of what a lot of people were saying in this answer. The top right-hand or left-hand one points to kind of that design issue we were talking about earlier, where a lot of houses original houses are modest and small, and that's great. And we don't necessarily want them torn down and a huge house going in there, but an ADU is a way to get more space for a growing family, or just more space in general without messing with kind of the front of the house. Other people just in general support the idea of creating affordable housing for people that work and live and need to be in the area, like teachers and essential workers. Others were saying that this is a nicer alternative than newer boxy homes and duplexes. Again, if we can build and change and stabilize at the same time with ADUs rather than scraping and building new homes, that actually conserves the feel of the neighborhood better. And then more thoughts about keeping the character of the neighborhood and keeping the houses and accommodating growing families, accommodating adults grandparents who honestly couldn't afford to move closer and buy their own single family home to be near their grandkids, a way for them to come and live and help with childcare. So we've also definitely heard some concerns. And some of these I can talk about a little bit, as we've done a lot of research and talked to people at the city to address some of these, and have learned from, as the councilman mentioned, the project in Chaffee Park. And then others maybe we'll address with the Q&A section. So there's concerns about the impact of this on having more people and how that would impact services. So things like garbage, things like, honestly, fire, first responders not having access to ADUs. There's concern about this being something that was weirdly specific and unique to Sloan's Lake. Although, as we saw on the map, there's actually a lot of the neighborhood that allows ADUs, including, a lot of the city that allows ADUs, including already a large chunk of the neighborhood. People concerned about just how this would change characteristics and density of the neighborhood. And, that is a conversation to be had. It is not, it wouldn't be accurate to say that adding ADUs wouldn't change anything in the neighborhood. I think that for the people for whom it would be a benefit, it's worth it, and it's a gentle change rather than some of the more impactful change that we've seen. And there's, again, concern, going to the left right-hand column here, about people using this really as a money-making venture, and the impact on alleys, the impact on street parking, if this was appropriate given that people's lots are kind of small, and again, a lot of concerns about parking. So we will come back to this for sure during Q&A. I'm sure a lot of you have questions that might be similar to these. Moving on for now, I'll talk a little bit about the outreach we've done so far, and then if the councilwoman is on, I know she was having a little bit of technical difficulties, I will kick it over to her to kind of talk a little bit more about where we're going, what we're going to do with the feedback we hear from you, what the plan is. So far we have the online survey set up, and if we're going to use that as our main way of gathering feedback from people, but totally understand that not everyone has access to a computer or feels comfortable. If you know someone who would like to take the survey who does not have access to a computer, they're welcome to call our office, and I'll walk through it with someone on the phone. We will work it out, because we want to hear from everyone. The councilwoman sent mailers to all the affected property owners, so hopefully you got those. And those were sent not just to the doors in Sloan's Lake, but actually the registered property owners. So if a property owner didn't live at that property or lived somewhere, they still got notified in the mail, because this will affect their land. And then we also flyered all the doors in the neighborhood. And now we're doing our 2 town halls, or the first of the town halls. There'll be another one on October 4th, this Sunday. It's going to be the exact same format. So if someone couldn't make this one, they're welcome to come to that. And we'll also have these recordings available. So I'll kick it over to the councilwoman now to talk a little bit about next steps.
Thank you for this project. It's been great. So for next steps, the most important thing is that we hear from you. I do not want to do something that you don't want done in your neighborhood. It's essential that we have feedback from all of the neighbors and all of us who would be impacted. So I sure that we continue the outreach. We sure that
Councilwoman, you're breaking up a little bit. You could try turning off your video, maybe, and
Okay.
just audio.
Thank you. Is that better? So we want to make sure that we put out the survey and hear from a majority of the residents. So what would is continue to have to drop off flyers, and after the next call from school, I would make a decision on whether to push this forward. It won't be a decision. It took a little bit to make that decision in Chappie Park. So I hear that I'm still having internet connections. I'm sorry, my son's gaming downstairs and I told him not to this evening, but it's hard to pick your battles right now with teenagers and virtual learning. So how about we go to the Q&A so that I don't have to keep breaking off.
You just got a lot better in the last.
Oh, did I get better now?
Yeah.
Okay. I think my son finally got, we're not gaming right now. So thank you all. So why don't we go to the Q&A and then we'll talk about number 7, the possible second round of flyering.
Okay, sounds good. So for Q&A, we have myself available, the councilwoman. We also have Tina Axelrod from the planning department, and she's not just from the planning department. She has incredible zoning knowledge and can answer pretty much all your technical questions. So we're super excited to have her. We also have Michaela Fernhaber from the planning department as well, also extremely knowledgeable about ADUs. And we have Libby Adams from the planning department, and Libby is our assigned planner for this project. So as this moves forward, she kind of coordinates and shepherds everything through. So the 5 of us are available for questions. We will see if there are any people with their hands raised or with Q&A.
So there's one question that I can start with. Can you hear me okay, Naomi?
Yeah, you sound fine.
Thank you. So I think, Tina, this might be for you. Many of the old Victorians do not have structural foundations to support the attached ADU idea. You'd have to rebuild the main home foundation. Can exceptions be made within setback requirements for smaller casitas accord from the alley? I think across from alley, and I'm not sure what that means. I found the original title abstract to my home under the floors, and my address used to be one of the largest before city created tiny parcels. So Tina, what I think that Tally is asking is, because it's an older Victorian house and the foundation is not solid, can there be exceptions made for setbacks for ones that would be in the alley?
Hi, I don't know if I'm visible or not. I don't see myself. So my name is Tina Axelrod. I'm the zoning administrator on the development services side of the department. So Michaela and myself oversee all the permitting, and Michaela is the supervisor of our residential review team that does all the reviews for the construction or establishment of an accessory dwelling unit. So I think the question was a concern that their lot is too small, because there are minimum lot sizes that get triggered if you want to build a detached ADU. In other words, another structure on your lot, which would house the additional dwelling unit. And if your current lot is less than that zone lot size, your only recourse, if you can't accommodate that additional dwelling unit through another means, like in the basement, but we heard in this case, the foundation isn't strong enough. There is a safety valve in terms of applying zoning standards to a specific property. It's called, it's a variance or exception procedure. You would need to submit your plans and your construction details for the accessory dwelling unit, knowing pretty much that you probably wouldn't get very far because of the lot size. and we would work with you to go to our Board of Zoning Adjustment, which hears cases every week on Tuesdays asking for exceptions from the zoning code. Right now, that's the only avenue to ask for an exception from. My lot is too small for a detached structure to contain my ADU. It is a public hearing, so you would be notifying and putting a sign up in your yard, letting everyone around you know that you were asking for this exception, and giving folks an opportunity to be heard if they have any concerns. So it is quite a process, but there is a path for exceptions, particularly given the interesting site-specific and structure-specific conditions that you're dealing with on your property.
Thanks for that, Tina. So I know that we have some people asking questions in the chat, and we also have people asking questions in the Q&A. So I'm just going to switch back and forth a little bit between them, so we make sure we get everybody's. Does that sound good?
Yep. And can you call on Daniel? He has his hand raised in the participants.
All righty.
Okay.
Oh, talking permitted.
Yep. Go ahead, Daniel, with your question.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
We can. Thank you for joining
Great.
us.
So thanks for allowing me to ask a question. As you know, I'm opposed to this ADU policy that you're advancing. And I appreciate the information you've laid out here and the fact that you focus very much on the benefits of ADUs for our neighborhood. But I'd like to know what your research has also demonstrated in terms of the detriments that you found. There have to be some examples of things that haven't gone right with ADUs, and I think us in the neighborhood need to hear about that as well.
It takes questions. So some of the issues that I have found with accessory dwelling units is when you go to build them, they end up being, the cost ends up being a bit originally for similar to any construction with housing costs. And then some of them, when you are building, I know of an accessory dwelling unit in Westwood that was built, and they're being deemed for, they have to replace their sidewalks, which was not something that they were aware of. So that was something that came up. Those are the two that I'm mostly aware of. The amount of ADUs that have been built in the city is very low. So there's not as much research on the negative impact. Since the 2010 rezoning, 20% of the city is zoned for accessory dwelling units. So those are the impacts I know. Tina, are there any other impacts that you're aware of?
Can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, sorry, I can't tell. We certainly, I think Naomi did a good job in regard to sharing the concerns that she heard from you and your neighbors, Daniel, and those are fairly typical. And those are concerns. I'm not saying they're truth-based or reality-based consequences in a natural order of things should you build or allow ADUs. The concerns are generally about increases in density and increased demand on parking. Whether we have seen those actual downsides come true where ADUs are allowed, I would generally say not to the extent of rising to complaints and enforcement actions on the part of our zoning inspectors and enforcement team. So if they're happening, we're not really getting that feedback at the city, and we haven't had, huge numbers of them. Probably the most you would find would be in the Central Park neighborhood, where they were often built from day one, and the density in that neighborhood is quite high, and the streets are actually fairly narrow, and we don't hear a lot of complaints from there about the fact that people are living in the ADUs and parking on the streets. I don't know, Daniel, if you've actually heard of things or you have specific concerns, it might be easier for us to respond to those.
No, I'm just taking all this in as you present it, and it looks to me like maybe you need to do a little more homework on ADUs to find out. It can't all just be, you know, sunshine and roses when it comes to changing a neighborhood this much. And I can appreciate the fact that we haven't had a large experience of these in our neighborhood, but certainly there's research out there that I think might indicate that there are some things that we all should be aware of and know about before we agree to allow this to happen in our community.
In my professional planning experience, and Naomi can speak to the same, it is a change. I mean, undeniable. It's a change in your neighborhood. And yes, it could add more people living in your neighborhood. Now, whether you see that as a benefit or a detriment seems to vary from neighborhood to neighborhood, city to city, and person to person. So I'm not prepared to say just because we're increasing the number of people in your neighborhood or the number of cars on the street that that's necessarily a detriment. The city is growing. We have a shortage of housing options in the city of Denver, and we have very few options for affordable rentals in the city of Denver, or you know, or for family members who can't seem to live on in the city after they've grown up here. That's where I stand, and that's what I see when I look around the country, that it's a deliberate policy decision to take whatever consequences might come because the benefits outweigh whatever marginal impacts that we see or can expect from these things.
Can you still hear me? I can appreciate that, and I clearly understand that you're an advocate for this policy. What I'm asking for, and I'm sorry that I'm not making myself very clear, is for more of a balanced view. There has to be another side of this. There has to be, whether it's from other cities across the United States or other parts of the world, there has to be a little more information that you can share with us so that we can make the most informed decision based on us personally and our neighborhood.
Yeah, and I hear you for sure. And I will say that that this has come up, the idea of a balanced, like for every positive, there must be a negative. And the research just does not bear that out as a truth with this. There is research we have looked at about how ADUs have been implemented in many cities that have them universally throughout. And in general, there are no massive downsides. Now, what Tina said, I think, is very true. Your personal sense and feeling of the neighborhood and what you value is your own and a conversation to have with the community. But in terms of tangible detriments, things people bring up, such as that it's going to bring taxes up to an insane degree or have some overwhelming negative effect on our neighborhood. None of the data and research that we have found has proven that to be true. So I can honestly say in the research and as a professional looking into this, we are not hiding anything from you. We've actually very much tried to do our due diligence and really, we've talked to the fire department, we've talked to the assessor to really vet these concerns, and can honestly say we have not found research backing up any major downsides to this, to ADUs.
Thank you, Daniel. If you can, please put your email or email my office. I'll put the general inbox in there. And as we gain more research and as we move forward with this, we'll definitely make sure to keep in touch with you. As the office be as responsive as possible. So with that, we'll take a question from the Q&A.
I'm sorry, Amanda, you're breaking up a lot. But thank you, Daniel. And Daniel has emailed us, and so we are in touch and shared some examples from Telluride about ADUs in Telluride and how they've impacted the alleys there. Yeah, Daniel has reached out, and we've logged his contribution to that, so we already have his contact info. Thank you. I'm going to go down to another question I can answer pretty quickly from Chris Grady. Have these one-off requests for ADUs generally been approved? Yes, they have generally been approved. There's very rare cases when they don't. The city policy very firmly supports ADUs being allowed universally. And so I mean, if Tina or anyone else wants to chime in, I think there's been just maybe a handful ever that have not gotten through. Nope, you're muted.
I'd say less than a handful.
Less than
Some
a
have been-
handful.
There have been a couple contentious ones,
Mhm.
but most of them have been approved.
Yeah. From the Q&A, is there a minimum size for a unit to qualify? This question is anonymous, so I'm imagining you are referring to the minimum size of an accessory dwelling unit, how small it could possibly be. I think, Tina, maybe you want to take that one?
I'll let Michaela answer that one.
Great, thanks, Michaela.
Yeah, so there's actually two different scenarios in how to describe this. And it really comes down to detached versus an attached ADU. And there's two very distinct differences there that I think it's beneficial for this group to understand. So rezoning will allow the use of an ADU, which can be attached or detached. What we're seeing on the screen right now is the dimensional standards for a detached accessory dwelling unit. So on this table, you'll see a few different requirements associated with detached accessory dwelling units. And it outlines, do you mind, whoever has it open?
Okay, yeah.
Down just a little bit to the bottom. So in this table, it'll show you some of the minimum, the maximum building footprint, and it's based off of lot size and in which zone district you're in. So depending on how big your lot is, the larger footprint you can have, or habitable space you can have. There's also dimensional standards that outline the size. So you can't have it be any larger than 36 feet in one dimension. There's a few other things to note, which I think is helpful for everyone. That previous question about zone lot size, do you mind scrolling up? Whoever has the building form table. So zone lot size, yeah, is right. So depending on what zone district you're in or it's rezoned to, you have a minimum zone lot size when you'd be eligible for this detached accessory dwelling unit. And so you can see that in this table. And like Tina earlier said, if you want to variance for a detached ADU, this is the route you would do it. There are, when it comes to attached accessory dwelling units, the minimum area is currently 300 square feet. We found that we believe this is an error in the zoning code, and we're currently undergoing a zoning text amendment to modify that to be more in alignment with the area requirements of the detached accessory dwelling unit.
Great, does that answer?
And answer some of the questions.
Were there more?
Sorry. Yeah, feel free to elaborate if that didn't quite hit it.
Naomi, there's a bunch of questions that Michaela could probably rattle off the answers very quickly too, yeah. In the, I think it's the Q&A.
The Q&A, yeah, let's, yeah, why don't we focus on the questions related to the size here. So will the city look at how much of the building envelope is used? And I'd also like to throw in a question that I've heard from some other people about whether or not this still has to obey the lot coverage how that intersects.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start with the lot coverage one. So a detached accessory dwelling unit would still play into your lot coverage. So lot coverage calculations are actually determined by your primary structure. And so whenever a project comes in, the initial structure is assigned a building form. And in the urban zone district or context, it would most likely be urban house. And so the structures that would be eligible, well, the majority of the structures that would be eligible for ADU, so that's the lot sizes more than 3,000 square feet, usually have a building coverage of 37.5%. The 3,000 square foot one has a lot coverage allowance of 50%. There are some exemptions in building coverage, and that's, you can see it on the table. It says exemption from maximum building coverage. And so you can take 50% of the footprint or up to 500 square feet, as long as there's a minimum building separation between your primary structure, so that's usually the house you're living in, and the ADU. And yeah, so hopefully that answers that question. The building envelope, can somebody expand on what they meant by that question?
Whoever asked that question, would you mind raising your hand so we can unmute you? Yep. I'm not seeing who that was. So yeah, sorry. I think I might have to move on. Just looking if there are any other. I'm going to, thanks for that so much, Michaela. I'm gonna let Elise ask a question now. Elise, you are unmuted.
Yeah, hi, thank you guys for putting this together. I was curious about, structures that potentially have been kind of grandfathered in as opposed to sort of building new structures, if you will, and how the zoning and the offset, rules apply, if you will, to those structures. So the example being, potentially a structure that's on the property line, whereas the zoning requires it to be offset.
Go ahead, Michaela.
Okay.
Who gets the short straw? Go ahead.
That's all right. In the use limitations for ADUs, which is outlined in Article 11, it specifically outlines that an ADU use has to follow this ADU, detached accessory dwelling unit building form. So that means if you have an existing structure, it has, and you want to establish an ADU use in it, and there hasn't been an ADU use established already, then it needs to meet these building form standards. So that means you have to have that 5-foot setback. Otherwise, you'd have to go through the exception process that Tina outlined before, which is a variance process. And so that's one of the situations that we see a lot as plans are coming through my group, is a lot of individuals want to convert a detached garage that's on the lot line to an ADU. And that's just not allowed unless you seek that variance.
That is also unusual in the code, and would not, that same type of constraint is not placed on any other pre-existing building. And we find this to be a little out of sync with the way we treat all other development in the city. So that is also the subject of a proposed amendment that's in the works as well. Michaela mentioned the 300 square foot for inside the main house ADUs that we're looking at correcting as well. So there's a few accessory dwelling unit related standards that we've now had the opportunity to really play around with, particularly in these last 5 years as people have built more and more of them in the city. So we are seeing some ability to know where the kinks are and work through them with some upcoming amendments. And that one that Michaela just described about having a pre-existing structure that hugs the property line, like your garage that you might want to convert for ADU use, will hopefully go the wayside. So stay tuned.
Thank you.
That being said, it still would have to meet all zoning and building code requirements once it comes in for permits.
Somebody asked about an egress window if it's in the basement. And could you answer that one, Michaela?
Absolutely. So any new bedrooms that are established in a basement require an egress window. So that if somebody's coming in and finishing a basement, putting a bedroom in there, it will need an egress window. Also, if somebody comes in and is finishing their basement, they're not putting a bedroom in, there has to be one egress window per that basement.
Great, thank you. I would like to have us pivot and talk about parking for a second, because we are getting a lot of questions about parking. We've got some questions about whether an ADU is required to provide an off-street parking space. We've got some general concern about how, well, there are often garages and off-street parking for the existing homes. People don't use them, and I don't know if we can force them off street. But just if we could have a little bit of discussion about how this may impact parking and if parking is required.
Hello? All right. With the establishment of an ADU use, you do not need to provide additional parking. That was a very deliberate policy choice made by the city when accessory dwelling units were first introduced into the code 15, 20 years ago. And when it was re-upped and the discussion came around again in 2010, for a lot of the societal community benefit reasons that Naomi went over in the beginning, it was decided at that time to continue the no additional parking requirement. Now, mind you, you can build a 4,000 square foot house next door to you or on your lot, and you do not have to provide a single off-street parking space. So we do not have required parking for a new single unit dwelling. So it seemed it seemed more consistent to consider not requiring the parking for the accessory dwelling unit as well, which in a single unit zone is capped. As Michaela said, the sizes sort of run with the proportional to the lot size, and you might only get 600 square feet or 800 square feet in an accessory dwelling unit on a typical size lot in the Sloan's Lake neighborhood. And we do have an occupancy limit on accessory dwelling units that we do not have for any other housing unit in the city. The number of occupants is capped at one occupant per every 200 square feet. And anecdotally, we're not seeing any overcrowding or anyone going beyond those limits in an accessory dwelling unit.
Can we talk, thank you so much for that answer. I think we might want to talk a little bit about just in general, parking impacts, how the city deals with those. I think people in general have a large concern about how much parking gets taken up on the street. I know, for instance, if you have a disability or need car access, because people certainly do. We know that biking and walking isn't an option for everyone. I don't know if planning department could share a little bit about, I think there's on-street parking spaces that you can get designated for someone with a disability.
I do not have good working knowledge of that. I mean, generally the streets are public unless there's a special program in place or you qualify for a handicap space in front of your house through whatever program the city has. Generally, the streets, as you all know, are available to anyone to park on unless there's an overriding limitation on the availability of those parking spaces. So there are residential parking programs. I'm not quite sure what the criteria are these days to qualify for those. But generally our residential neighborhoods work as they work. You know, there's no God-given right to a parking space on the street in front of your house. But generally parking is available and the streets aren't over occupied. You know, if you go to Capitol Hill, I think there's some significant struggles to find parking on the street if you live there and you don't have a garage or any off-street parking. I don't know that that's a significant issue in Sloan's Lake, you know, within a block of your house or what. So it's the same thing if someone built a duplex or a single unit and they don't use their garage. It's a finite resource and there's demand, but we don't control or we don't ration them out unless you qualify for a special program or space.
Thanks for that, Tina. I'm going to go to a question from Catherine. She wrote, given that ADUs can increase population density, they will likely increase demand on public services. How will we adapt to and respond to that demand? What impact will this have on schools, which are already underfunded? Will taxes be impacted to compensate something for this? A couple questions there. I think this is a really good opportunity for, I don't know if the councilwoman can jump in here with some of the discussions that we've actually had with on those specific topics, because they are important and people definitely wonder about them. So I will say, first of all, demand for public services. So fire access, which people have brought up. We met with fire chief and we asked him about this. We asked him about specifically concerns about accessing ADUs for fire safety. And he responded that it generally was not a problem and that they had full capacity to respond to any life safety event going on in an ADU, which I think is important to bring up, that the reason that there are rules and regulations around these buildings are to ensure safety and ensure life safety. And if there is something specific to a lot and someone's proposal to build an ADU, there is the process of permitting and the process of having a new structure signed off by multiple agencies that is meant to catch that. The fire department, you know, things have to be safe. So from the fire chief directly, no, ADUs are not a concern in terms of access. So how will we adapt? So other demands, people definitely worry about stormwater, sewage, things like that. And if neighborhoods can accommodate this many people, which I had a colleague point out that the average household size, the average number of people living in a household currently is, I think, a little bit over 2. It's 2 people in a house. When these were built around the turn of the century, the average household size was closer to 5, I think, if not more than that. And if anyone knows the exact number, you can jump in. These neighborhoods were built to accommodate more people than currently live in them. We've had a shrinking in family size, which I think is primarily the reason. People in the past have often lived not in exactly nuclear families. There have generally been more people living together. So these homes and the infrastructure is built to accommodate more people than currently live there. And in terms of schools, that is a really good question. In general, there has been a loss of student-aged children in our neighborhoods because they cannot afford to live here anymore. And that impacts the funding that goes to schools. So honestly, the more affordable we can make a neighborhood, the more we can hopefully have children still living in the neighborhood will be a benefit to schools. And I know that this is something the councilwoman cares a lot about. I don't, if your audio is working, if you'd like to chime in on this. And it's something that many of our neighborhoods have struggled with, is actually the loss of families and the shrinking of family sizes. Yes, oh, I had to unmute you. There you go.
Thank you. So to answer part of the question about the schools and the funding, actually DPS did a study within the past 5 years, and there is a decrease in elementary schools within the Northwest Denver area. So if there is an increase, we will definitely get the funding that is needed. But for right now, there is actually a decrease in students in Northwest Denver, and there's an increase in students in Southwest Denver. I've been studying that very closely because as gentrification and displacement has happened in Northwest Denver, families have moved out, and they've actually been able to track them into other areas, into Southwest Denver. And as funding in the state and the city budget have been impacted, I will definitely take this into consideration.
Great, thank you so much. We also, part of that question too was a question about taxes. And so I'll take an opportunity to answer that because we did meet with the city's tax assessor to ask them exactly this question, because of course people are concerned about if this would have a dramatic impact on taxes, or would it make property values go down? Would it make property values go up? We've heard concerns about both things. Both can't happen at the same time. So we really wanted to know what the city assessor himself thought. The assessor's answer is this. The rezoning to allow ADUs should have a minimal impact on tax assessments. And the reason is that there's an entire huge algorithm equation of how the city measures property values. Sometimes zoning can impact that, but that's generally when you go from one zoning to something extremely different. So if you went from a single family zoned lot and all of a sudden you zoned that to be able to be commercial and 5 stories, that property is now worth something very different. It's a whole different beast. Rezoning for an ADU doesn't change, again, doesn't change the base zoning. It doesn't change it from being a single family property or single unit property. It just allows that other structure in the back. So his response was that that would be, in terms of evaluations, the rezoning itself wouldn't have an impact as much. Where you do see an impact, though, is when people do build ADUs. It's the exact same impact that you see when someone pops the top on their house or significantly improves their property, which people do all the time. And so adding an ADU does significantly improve your property. So if you are someone who's interested in building an ADU, it's certainly something to keep in mind that your property will be valued different. And over time, as many people start building ADUs, it could potentially bring up the tax assessments for the neighborhood. However, he also pointed out that there are many, 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 many other factors that impact the tax assessments for a neighborhood much more than that. It is also market driven, which is ultimately unstable. So I know it's not a total black and white answer, but that is what the assessor said. So I wanted to share that with you all. And then, let's see, Catherine asked, so you won't have, oh, somebody's got some echo. So you won't have an increased tax base, but we'll have more demand on services. I'm not quite sure how to answer that question.
I think you just answered it, because I think she typed it before you finished your answer.
Okay.
I hope, I thought your answer answered that one.
Okay.
And I think the demand on services could be looked at several different ways, Naomi. Maybe the demand on services mean more trash. They could mean more parking, more people in the parks. And Tina, can you answer a question? How many accessory dwelling units are on average per year are built?
I should have that, I should have had that chart handy. I feel so bad because I don't. I have like all these other things ready at my hand. It's been a very small number compared to the number of new dwelling units added to the city over the course of the last 10 years. For a while there, we were seeing less than 10 a year during the sort of early out of the recession years. I think more recently, and Libby, you're on too. Do you have this data at your fingertips? I don't think we've reached much beyond 50 per year in the last couple of years, maybe a little more. So that's out of a whole city. Building permits were issued for only about, sorry. If you have that data, Naomi, go for it.
I don't have the data, but I did want to bring up the slide that showed how many people, at least in Sloan's Lake, planned to, just as the...
Yeah. We looked at Platt Park, for example. Platt Park neighborhood opted into an allowance for ADUs in 2010, where they didn't have any previous entitlement to it. So they're kind of our laboratory rat. And I think I looked at it and there were over 200 properties, single unit properties. And I think we've gotten less. Oh shoot, I gotta go look it up. I'm gonna shut up and not put out numbers there that I actually don't know are true, but go to another question. I'll go look it up and let you know. It's okay. Been a very trickle.
Yeah, okay. Tina, I think last year it was roughly around 100 ADUs were permitted in the city.
Thanks,
How about we get that information?
Yep.
And Naomi, we can add that to the landing page so that we have that moving forward in the future, so we know exactly how many accessory dwelling units have been built per year and since we've allowed them in the zoning code.
Yeah, I think that I will put together probably can go back and listen to the recording of this and put together a Q&A document and include some things that we're hearing from people. That's a great idea.
Thank you.
Let's see, if we want to go on to another question, here's one. Who approves the plans for review? Is it a committee? Are there neighborhood representatives? And concern over maintaining the aesthetics and historical quality of the neighborhood?
I could take the who approves part. All rezonings come before Denver City Council. So City Council is the body that approves any change in land use. It goes through the committee process. That's one point. But what happens first is it goes to the Denver Planning Board, and it gets vetted through the Denver Planning Board and then moves on and either gets a recommendation to go before City Council. And after the Denver Planning Board, it goes through the Land Use, Transportation, and Infrastructure Committee, short for LUTI. And then that's not a kill committee, but it is a committee that recommends moving forward. And then it goes to City Council, and there's a full public hearing at City Council, and then myself and my colleagues approve all of Denver's land use rezonings. Amy, do you want to take the second part of that question?
Yeah, and I think, ultimately when you do have the zoning, The ADU is permitted by the Development Services Department. So they are the ones who review it for consistency with the code, for safety, for that entire process. So yeah, two different answers if you are talking about the general allowing for an ADU or the actual building of an ADU. But once you have, so we call it, the word we use is entitlement, which is kind of funny. As a technical term, it means the kind of the bundle of rights and abilities you have that go along with your property. So if you're rezoned to allow an ADU, you get that entitlement to have an ADU. Once a property has that, they don't need to go back and ask for it again. You need to go through the entire like permitting and structure and building process with the city. I think it's a good question about the aesthetics and historical quality. I will point out that, of course, we've got a historic district in Sloan's Lake, and there was actually just recently a case that I believe Kara Hahn from Landmark Preservation spoke about someone having concerns about an ADU rezoning happening in a historic district, and what she described was that landmarks and the historic status of a building or landmark designation doesn't preclude an ADU. Landmarks would not turn down an ADU. Their charge is to evaluate plans for consistency, historical, the design guidelines that they're supposed to require of any change that happens to a building. So for ADUs that are permitted in historic districts, they just have an extra layer of review. They have to look compatible with the main building. They have to have the right materials and in proportions and things, just like an addition or any other change to that property. But just in general, for neighborhoods, ADUs are one way to accommodate change with while preserving the aesthetics of the neighborhood as seen from the street, because they're required to be in the back. They're required to not be visible. Of course, if you're walking down an alley, you're going to see them, but the idea is that they're actually a really great way to preserve and not change anything having to do with how the neighborhood feels from the street, while being able to add on in the back. So hopefully that answers those questions.
Thank you, Naomi. And then I see a comment in the chat about developers maximizing allowable square footage, and if zoning for an ADU, most developers will build an ADU. Mackenzie or Tina, can you talk about the requirements of having it building an ADU and owner occupancy in the main unit?
Sure. So a lot of Sloan's Lake, as Naomi showed you, has a single unit zoning designation. What will show up as in your assessment, and if you're looking up your zoning, as an SU or U-SUC. So in single unit zone districts, when we do allow the ADU use and building form, there are a couple of additional limitations on ADUs in single unit zones that don't apply to, example, if you were to build an ADU and in some of those 2 unit zoned areas in Sloan's Lake. And one of them is an owner occupancy requirement. And more specifically, it says the owner of the land on which the accessory dwelling unit use is maintained has to occupy either the main house, the primary dwelling unit, or the ADU as the owner's legal and permanent residence. And we're actually updating the code to clarify what it means for the owner to have their legal and permanent residence. We're going to borrow from the short-term rental ordinance and define it as the owner's primary residence. So we would be looking at evidence that they're registered their vehicle there, they're registered to vote there, they receive their mail there. Those types of things are evidence of primary residence. So this is intended to ensure that the owner is on the property, to be accountable for that additional density in a dwelling unit on the property.
Perfect. That's great information. Thank you, Tina. Naomi, do you see any other questions that haven't been answered?
I think we'll get to you in a second, Elise. I'll add a little bit to that, I think part of Joshua's question also was about how, say there's a developer, regardless, they're gonna, build something new. They're gonna build a new single family house on this piece of property. And maybe whether, maybe there's two questions, whether if that property is zoned for an ADU, it's somehow more attractive for a developer to redevelop. And then also, would most developers who are building new max out and build an ADU? We talked to some developers, and the answer that they gave, again, just the ones that we talked to, were that it wasn't necessarily a huge draw, like a huge bonus. In addition, if most of the areas in Denver allow ADUs anyway, it takes that pressure off of an individual one being more attractive. But in general, he didn't really see that, if that's correct, as I'm remembering it, Amanda. But also, do developers build ADUs when they can? That's a good question. I would personally like to go do that analysis for my own education, just based on what I've seen walking around. I do see a fair number of ADUs being built these days in brand new construction, when someone's just building a total new house. But it's also a little hard to tell, because in general, when developers come in and build a brand new house, it's usually a rather large and rather expensive one, and they definitely build a 3-car garage as well. So sometimes it's a little hard to tell if there is an ADU on top of that. So I'm sorry, there's not necessarily a really good answer for that. But you are correct that whoever buys that property has to live on site. So in a sense, building an ADU sort of restricts the property even more. You are required to live there as the property owner. You can't live off site and rent it out if you have an ADU on it. So that's kind of an interesting aspect.
Correct. That's very correct information. Thank you, Naomi.
I think, Naomi, just to provide a little more context for, will developers build them? It is so much a supply and demand and what's hot in the market. If you look at Central Park, the old Stapleton neighborhood in South Stapleton, that development from day one, back in 2001, 2002, when they started building homes in Central Park, they have the right to build detached accessory dwelling units in that community from day one. And there were, as you know how it probably works, there was a menu of at least 10 different builders building at any one time, and they all had the same right. But what you saw on the ground during the first building out of Central Park through the first 10 to 15 years were very few detached ADUs, and most of the ones that were built were used as guest homes or home offices. But if you look more recently, in the last 5 years, I would say there's definitely increased interest and increased demand for having an additional dwelling unit either inside the house or outside the main house to accommodate any number of the type of living arrangements we talked about early on. So it really does ebb and flow with the market and with demand. So if we're seeing an increase in demand for these, then developers, being the animals they are, will respond and build more, most likely. I mean, that's just simple economics and supply and demand. Naomi, I have on my computer, I don't know if there's a way to share in Zoom.
Yeah, I can see if I can allow you to share. I believe
I have the Platt Park, which I think is a really good, like I said, laboratory for seeing the trend in a particular neighborhood over time.
So Tina, if you go to the bottom of your screen, I think you might be able to have a share screen button down there.
Oh, shoot. I have it on my computer that I'm not a panelist. Okay.
Naomi,
that's fine.
Naomi, if
I'm
you
on
make her a
two different
co-host, you
screens.
can, if you make her a co-host, she can do it.
All right, I'm gonna try. Change role to attendee. I think you are a presenter already.
I'm in the role twice, Naomi.
Oh,
Making your life difficult. Sorry.
well,
And it's 23 permits issued between 2014 and June 2020. And oh, good. It's rejoining me, I think, as a, okay. Host has promoted me. Thank you. So where does it say share?
it should be at the bottom if you're looking at all our faces.
Oh, there it is.
Yep.
Okay, you all are probably going to see. No, now it's saying no, I can't.
Oh, sometimes you have
All
to
right.
enable it. Oh,
I have to what?
sometimes your computer settings need to enable screen sharing to the Zoom app.
All right, I give up on this. It was only, I'll send it to your office so you can post it, but it was 23 permits out of, I don't have the number of units. It's quite an impressive number of properties from Mississippi. Broadway is the west boundary, Evans is the south boundary, Downing and I-25. So we're talking many city blocks that are residential. There's obviously some commercial embedded as well, but only 23 permits for detached ADUs in the course of 6 years. And they had the right for longer, but there were no permits issued prior to 2014. Again, I think we're seeing a growing trend, and the demand that was there for the first 10 years after 2010 might not be indicative of the demand that we're going to see in the next 10 years. But people, they do cost a lot of money to finance and build. This is not something that your everyday family is going to go out and do immediately or easily. I mean, we're trying to remove some of those barriers, but it's not an easy thing to do. It costs money to build to code a new dwelling unit on a property.
Thank you, Tina. That's great information. And once you get that to my office, we'll make sure to add that to the landing page. I think the more data we have, the better informed we can all be. I really want to be respectful of everybody's time. We said we would end at 8 o'clock. So Naomi, do you see any last questions that haven't been answered? If not, we could wrap up with next steps.
We've got one hand up. We've got Elise. Can we squeeze her in?
Yep, absolutely.
All right.
I'm hoping you guys are going to answer this. I was just curious of what the next steps are, what's the decision-making timeline on this?
Yep, that's where we're going.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Elise, for that question. So we are hosting another town hall this Sunday. And the reason I chose Sunday is there's a Orthodox community in the Sloan's Lake neighborhood. And we've gotten some feedback over the last year that I've been in office that they have a very hard time attending any meetings on Saturday because it's they do not get on technology. It's their religious day. So we chose Sunday afternoon to hopefully accommodate more people, and we wanted it on a weekend. So we'll have the same exact format on Sunday, and then we will continue to push out the survey. And I'll probably do another round of either a mailer or a flyer, Elise, because I would like to at least get a few hundred in Chaffee Park. I think we got over 100 surveys answered. Is that correct, Naomi?
We had almost 400 responses.
Yep. So I would like to get as many responses as that. So I really want to push out the survey portion of this. And as we build support or opposition, I will give the opportunity to have those voices heard. I wish we were in a different time where it was not COVID and we were sitting face to face and talking to each other. I find it challenging that we're having to have everything virtual. But given the amount of accessory dwelling units that have come through in Sloan's Lake, I wanted to be as more proactive as possible. And we can also put that data up on the website landing page to how many actually accessory dwelling units of your neighbors are going through the process right now. I think you might all find that interesting. And then once we close the survey, we kept the survey in Chaffee Park open for 3 months. So I will probably do the same. We're headed into the holidays, so I will give that consideration as well. And then once we close the survey, we will fill out the map that Naomi started with at the beginning of the webinar of how many households have taken the survey. And we're not giving out any of that information. If you do take the survey, please know we're not sharing that information with anybody. We keep that information in-house and do not share it. And then I will have to and then probably in January, I'll make the decision to move forward or not. So I hope that answers your questions at least. And as we move forward, I'm happy to host more town halls for more discussion. And with that, we'll wrap up. I want to just thank everyone for joining us this evening, Tina, and everyone from Community Planning and Development. Thank you so much for taking time out of your evening for this webinar. Naomi, thank you for all of your hard work. And I'm so sorry I had some technical difficulties at the beginning. I will make sure to get all the glitches out from our next webinar on Sunday. So for those of you who've taken the survey, I would just ask that I have a call to action. Please talk to your neighbors about this. If you're outside, if you're raking leaves, if you're walking around the park, if you happen to bump into anyone, I know that chatting sometimes can feel a little bit nerve-wracking right now with COVID and in the time we're in, but if you social distance with your neighbor and you want to talk about this, I would just ask 5 of you on this call to talk to 5 neighbors, and we can create a groundswell of informed decision-making in the future. And with that, thank you all for joining us and have the good rest of your evening. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. And the recording of this will be on the website.